Welcome to today's Explainer. I'm really thrilled to have you here because we're looking at a topic that touches literally every single one of us. We're going to explore the concept of boundaries, but we're doing it through a very specific lens today: economics. Think about it. Every single day, we're exchanging currency. And I'm not just talking about the money in your bank account. I mean your emotional currency, your physical energy, your precious time. Basically, every interaction you have is a transaction on the ledger of your life. Okay, let's dive right into this. I want you to take a second and honestly reflect on your own relational bank accounts. Are you running a nice, healthy surplus, or are you constantly dipping into overdraft? Pouring all your energy, your time, and maybe even your actual finances into relationships that just give you absolutely zero return on investment. Look, if you're feeling emotionally and financially overdrawn, you are for sure not alone. Let's unpack exactly how this happens. We're going to start at the micro level of our relationships. In part one, the cost of connection. To put things into perspective, Mental Health America's screening data reveals a pretty staggering statistic. 84% of women and 75% of men report having a toxic friend at some point in their lives. I mean, that is a massive majority of us. If you've been feeling totally drained by your everyday social circles, well, this data completely validates what you're experiencing. Toxic connections are everywhere, and honestly, they're expensive. Think about when someone suddenly stops texting, right? Being ghosted isn't always just someone being rude. As this really powerful quote from Lemonade users highlights, silence is often a sign of deep emotional exhaustion. When someone just completely shuts down communication, it's usually because the dynamic has become way too draining to maintain. It's a protective mechanism against a relationship that is constantly asking for way more than it ever gives back. So how do these hidden fees actually drain our accounts? According to Mental Health America, toxic people use high-level manipulation. They subtly make you feel terrible about yourself, and they drown you in constant judgment and negativity. They rely on passive aggression instead of open communication, and they operate from a place of pure self-centeredness. So every single time you interact with someone exhibiting these traits, you are paying a heavy emotional tax. Let's transition from our friendships over to our family dynamics with part two, the debt of gratitude. The emotional accounting gets incredibly complex when cultural expectations tell us we inherently owe our families just for existing. A perfect example of this is the Filipino cultural concept of utang na loob. Defined impartially, it basically translates to a debt of one's inner self or a debt of gratitude. This is the deeply rooted cultural expectation that because parents provided the gift of life and education, the child basically owes them a lifelong debt. It creates this intense obligation that can dictate huge life choices, from what you study in college to how you spend your hard-earned income as an adult. And on the flip side of that is the immense fear of being labeled walang utang na loob. This is an expression describing extreme ungratefulness. It literally means without debt inside. The intense fear of being branded with this label keeps so many people completely trapped in familial obligations, often at the total expense of their own mental, emotional, and financial well-being. To them, the societal cost of breaking that contract just seems way too high. Which brings us to this brilliant, albeit heartbreaking, observation from Unearth Psychotherapy. Collectivist family pressures can literally force us to revert to our smallest selves, causing us to shrink the second we step back into environments bound by these unspoken debts. You could be a fully secure, independent adult out in the real world, but crossing that family threshold can trigger this involuntary response to overwhelming emotional obligation. That emotional shrinking directly impacts our wallets. And that brings us to part three: family, finance, and guilt. We've talked about emotional debt, but what happens when the debt becomes literal? When family members ask you to open your actual bank account for them? The crucial thing here is recognizing when you're being manipulated. According to insights from Money254, financial guilt tripping has some very specific red flags. Watch out for people weaponizing shared childhood memories to make you feel obligated. Be super wary of exaggerated stories or these really intense emotional pleas designed just to force your hand. And definitely look out for those agonizingly long conversations where you are trapped by politeness into agreeing to spot them cash. So how do we fix this? We establish clear, formal boundaries. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the IOU app recommend these exact, actionable steps before a single dollar changes hands. 1. Write down the specific amount. 2. Explicitly agree on whether this is a loan or a gift. And 3. If it is a loan, agree on exactly when repayment is expected. Moving from this hazy, informal guilt to a structured, formal agreement protects both your money and the relationship itself. Okay, let's zoom out to the macro level now in part 4, institutional and workplace stress. It's one thing to set boundaries with your mom or your best friend, but what happens when our jobs and institutional pressures completely strain our boundaries, even when we know better? To understand this, we're looking at a really rigorous financial study conducted on the Philippine Coast Guard. This study exposes a massive, completely fascinating knowledge-to-practice gap in highly stressful jobs. This breaks it down perfectly. The personnel show a very high cognitive capability when it comes to prioritizing essential expenses. They know the theory, but when it comes to execution, the absolutely lowest metrics are investing regularly and experiencing rare stress from conflict. Why is that? Because despite having high financial literacy, the extreme operational stress of their jobs creates a sort of status quo bias. When your workplace demands literally everything from you, you just don't have the mental bandwidth left to take on the perceived risk of investing or to effectively balance your personal life. The institution just drains the energy you need for your own growth. To combat this kind of massive institutional drain, you have to aggressively protect your downtime. Mental Health America provides some really fantastic guidelines for finding balance at home. It is absolutely vital to practice unplugging, like literally shutting down your devices so you can fully disconnect from work. You also have to avoid overcommitting your free time. Recognizing when you need personal time and making sure you divide household responsibilities are absolutely critical boundaries you have to set if you want to recharge your batteries. Which perfectly leads us into our final section, Part 5, Reclaiming Your Personal Value. Beyond our families and our jobs, society itself has these huge expectations, like beauty standards that constantly demand we sacrifice both our self-worth and our hard-earned cash. Commentators like Alex Light and Ivana Split have spoken really powerfully about the whole consumerist push behind modern beauty standards. The normalization of things like Botox and cosmetic surgery, it completely drains us. It drains our actual bank accounts because of the high financial costs. It takes a massive physical toll through painful recoveries, and it bankrupts us emotionally by trapping us in this endless loop of social media comparisons. Reclaiming your value means finally saying no to societal pressures that literally view your insecurities as their profit margin. We absolutely must eliminate these toxic influences to reclaim our value. The stark reality is that an average of 80% of Americans have experienced emotional abuse. 80%. Creating healthy boundaries isn't just some nice, fluffy self-care tip. It is a fundamental requirement for your mental and physical health. It is literally how you protect your personal ledger. So how do we put this into real-world practice? Well, setting boundaries means learning to say no firmly but professionally. Mental Health America actually gives us these great practice scripts to use. For the workplace, you could say, I can't take on additional tasks right now, but I'm happy to revisit this later. Or for family, I really appreciate your concern, but I'd rather handle this my own way. Having these scripts ready in your back pocket means you are never caught off guard when someone tries to make a withdrawal that you just can't afford. We've covered so much ground today, from toxic text messages to cultural family debts, workplace burnout, and even societal beauty standards. But I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to ponder. If you finally stop shrinking yourself to pay off endless debts of gratitude to everyone else, how much room will you finally have to grow? Remember, you are the CEO of your own life's ledger. It is time to balance the books. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.